Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the first Men's Mental Health Perspective Live panel discussion. My name is Stephen Hall, and at the beginning of the year, I started a newsletter on LinkedIn to explore topics around men's mental health. And since then, I've had hundreds of conversations with men and women, which sparked the idea of these lives to provide the opportunity to extend that discussion. The first topic is based on my newsletter, Supporting Men at Work, which is why I've asked Michael, Andrew and Matt to join me this afternoon. Despite growing awareness, men's mental health at work is still a taboo subject. And today, what we want to do is explore how leadership culture, recruitment and individual mindset all intersect and what we can actually do to support change. Gents, could I ask you to introduce yourselves and tell us one thing that you're doing at the moment that is making a difference to you or to someone else? Matt, do you want to start us off?
Yeah, sure. So my name is Matthew Cameron. I'm a people strategist, a founder, and someone who's been on both sides of the burnout conversation. So essentially, with my work, I help businesses to protect performance and morale when everything around them is shifting, whether that's scaling or restructuring or just trying to keep their good people. So my work sits in the intersection of leadership, well-being, and culture. But I support teams to stay resilient and connected and human when it most matters. And I guess the thing that I am doing for myself and others right now is a rather large thing. In 6 days' time, not that I am counting, I set off for a 330-mile hike from Edinburgh to Ben Hope in the very northwest of Scotland. So that's for a suicide prevention charity. Their cause very close to my heart. And yeah, I'm at the end of my training. I'm now sort of tapering off, and in just under a week, I get started on that walk. So it should be quite exciting.
That's awesome. Thanks very much, Matt, and good luck for that one. And Michael, can I pass over to you?
Yeah, of course. I'm Michael Robinson. I work in recruitment, but I try and specialise on supporting men with mental health, either into work or men who are in workplaces who need some support to just perform better and feel more comfortable about themselves. I've done this for the last 12 years and I've focused more so on men's mental health in the last sort of 5 to 6 years, as I've seen there's a huge demand for it and struggled quite a bit myself as well. What am I doing for myself or for somebody else? I think I'll say for myself, I am being a lot more vocal about how I'm feeling, and I'm working on being a lot more self-aware, which I'm finding really helpful and actually helpful for them as well.
That's brilliant. Good to hear. Thanks very much for that. And Andrew, over to you.
Oh, thank you for the welcome. Yeah, so my name's Andrew Payne. I'm a full-time professional speaker, leading in my speaking work on men's well-being, men's mental health. It's a busy topic for me. And then I talk on other well-being stuff. Burnout particularly is a busy topic, as is work-life balance and time. I'm also a podcaster, do an amount of campaigning as well, and loving life at the moment. I think the thing for me that I'm doing, I'll use this as a brief plug. So I'm writing a book at the moment. I'm sort of doing that for me, because when you're writing a book, you're trying to do a good job on it. There's the research that's going to help you in what you do anyway. But I want to ensure that all profits from the book goes towards grassroots projects that support men and boys. That's really important to me. And that's forever and a day. 10 years time, if the book is selling at all, that I want that in place. So potentially I'm doing something for someone else. Depends how many copies I sell, I suppose, when the book's published.
That's a good plug for it anyway. Thanks very much for that, Andrew. I really appreciate it. And thank you very much, gents. So what we'll do is we'll go straight into the questions. The format that we're going to take this afternoon is that we've got some focus questions for each of the guys. And then we're going to throw it up to a wider discussion and invite any questions that come in. So Matt, can we start with you? My first question to you, from your perspective in the creative industry, how do you see society's expectations of masculinity showing up in the workplace?
Yeah, so it's an interesting question. What is masculinity at work? What is masculinity at home? But if we're just talking about work, is it Don Draper? Is it Andrew Tate? Is it being quietly resilient while providing for your family? It's like it could be these sorts of things. But men are we're often put in a box in a lot of ways. Got to be performing, processing, and I think especially in your more creative side of things, output is very much linked to input, and you can push yourself quite to breaking point by trying to perform and provide, and talking about things like mental health or suicide. It's seen as or mistaken in a lot of ways for weakness, I would say. Burnout is almost more like a badge of honor than it is a troubling sign. So I think masculinity in the workplace can be both a positive and a negative. It's something that we feel like we need to be doing, but also it's a stereotype that we are put into, and it can do some good, it can do some bad. But I think we need to start talking about it a lot more. I think we need to talk about the positive sides of how we can all be great men at work. And didn't mean to just name the band there, but hey, they can get a little plug there.
Thanks for that. And given what you've said there, you've been an advocate for inclusive workplace culture. What role do you think that male leaders play in shifting the narrative around vulnerability and strength and opening up in the workplace?
So it's again a super fascinating thing. Vulnerability is not weakness. It's leadership, and it invites more trust and honesty. If you look at the data, when leaders, and I know I've accidentally there associated men with leaders, and forgive me for that. But when we talk about leadership in general, people who share their own story and their own history or struggles with mental health, it opens up conversations throughout the entire industry. People are more likely to speak about it when people they look up to or report to talk about it and are open with it. And the uptake of well-being programs and individual level interventions skyrockets when leadership are open about it. So I personally, when I go in and chat with companies, I tell my story. I'm very open with it. I'm not going to take up the spotlight here, but in 2019 I very nearly took my own life, and that was the catalyst for me to be doing what I do now and talking about the impact of work on people, and part of that is to show the impact that work can have on people as human beings, but it's also to open up that conversation. It's to be someone there in that room that starts it and opens it up for further people to continue talking about it, and we definitely need more of that, just to start the conversation, but to also help with people feel open to tell their story and be open to asking for help when they need it, because it's something we could all do with a little bit more of.
Yeah, that's really valuable, and appreciate you sharing that with us, Matt, because I know how difficult it can be. And I'm just wondering, kind of given my experience when I was in the same place, my instinctive reaction to those feelings came from a place of shame, and I was actually less likely to share those feelings and experiences, and it took quite a while, quite a good few years before I felt confident enough to tell anybody else that that's how low that I'd got. And I'm just wondering whether that was a similar situation for you.
Yes and no. For me, I went in my shell a little bit, and I worked through it, and I wouldn't recommend anyone, go and do what I did, but it worked for me at that time, and it's what I needed. But I wasn't avoiding talking about it, but when I did talk about it, there is, I noticed the way people sat back and the way they sort of started engaging with the conversation. And for me, that opened my eyes, and I was like, I need to talk about this further. I need to talk about this more. But, I never felt overt shame in a way that I didn't want to talk about it. But it is always something I've struggled with in a way. It's, my, I guess, route into now speaking about this and, being looked up to, and feels a bit awkward because I came from that place of such low. It's just like, I'm like, what gives me any right to be talking in, a room full of people? What makes me the guy on the stage? But the fact that I am willing to talk about it is, something that can be powerful. And if I can use my story to help others, then I'm more than happy to continue doing it.
Yeah.
It's not about me at that point. It's about helping other people.
Yeah, it's about that lived experience and utilizing that lived experience to show other people and kind of give people that validity to share their stories as well, that they don't have to shy away from it and hide away from it. I think that's really, really valuable, in particular for men.
Sorry to interrupt, but what you said there at the end was really important. And I'm not going to name the event. I'm not going to name the company, but I very early into my journey on this, I got booked to speak at a national conference.
Yeah.
And somebody pretty much literally said, "You were the only man we could find."
Wow.
And they probably shouldn't have said that to me. But that was shocking. It was like, we looked at the rest of the panel talking about, mental health and well-being, and there were a lot of amazing speakers, but they were all women. And that's not to discount what they do. They were all amazing at what they do, but they literally gave me the gig, and I was just happy to have it and to share my story, because I was very early on this journey. But it was shocking to me that there weren't more men talking about this. And maybe some of those men are on this call, on this live, and maybe we need to be doing more to get ourselves out there. But I found that shocking, and we need to change that.
Okay, brilliant. Thank you very much for sharing that, Matt. I really appreciate it. Andrew, can we pass over to you now? My first question to you is that I've noticed you've spoken quite powerfully about burnout, especially male burnout, which kind of tends to fly underneath the radar. What do you think are the signs that are often missed by managers that should maybe be looking out for?
There's so many signs. I mean, I don't think it helps that we often use the term burnout quite lightly. Oh, I'm feeling a bit burnt out today. Well, you don't sound very burnt out. And then some other people say they're burnt out and they're not well. Other people say, I was burnt out 4 times last year. Were they? The World Health Organization definition of burnout isn't that helpful, because it's just chronic workplace stress that hasn't been well managed. So it's somewhat brief. And as we know, the triggers for burnout can be varied. It's not just the workplace thing. Although I've read in HR News, by the way, which is a riveting read for anyone that's interested, that it is indeed an occupational hazard. That's how we separate that out. And yet when I talk to people, when I'm delivering workshops and talks on burnout, hands up who agrees with the World Health Organization definition, hands up who thinks it's really lacking. Everyone puts their hands up and say, well, we think it's lacking. What about parenting, caring for elderly relatives, financial concerns, physical health concerns, being stuck in the family courts? neighbours from hell, the list goes on. So I think it's hard to spot the signs, partly because a lot of us don't really know what burnout is.
Yeah.
And it's great that the word is in the language today and then we use it. But of course, with all these new words, gaslighting the same, when we start using these words a lot, there's then confusion about what they really mean because we're just banding them around to mean all kinds of things. I think in answer to your question, we can often think, oh, it's a heavy workload, too much work, not enough time, which is true. That can be a red flag. If a company has lost staff, often because people are citing burnout, red flag. I think for people, but I'm thinking of men because I'm a man myself and identify as a man, is I think ambition has pushed me to the edge, genuine ambition about what I want to create. You could say I want that because I've got this long-held stereotype of being provider and protector, and it's all very masculine and all wrong. But I'm just ambitious. I want to achieve in my life, as women, men, people do, and that means then that I push myself and I override natural boundaries. So if you're someone that's ambitious, could you just be aware of that? I would definitely say. If you're someone with a passion for something or other, we all know it's important that we have a passion, and of course it is. But then I've worked with leaders who are passionate about their cause. That's why they set up their charity. So passionate are they that they lose sight of everything else. And they don't just burn themselves out. Yeah. They burn their staff out because the cause becomes more important to them. It's become more important than the people working with them to impact that cause. In terms of practical red flags, they're the obvious things: mood changes, loss of sense of humor. You start sacrificing things that you would, I ain't got time to go to the gym. I'll need to stay up till midnight. And then that becomes your norm. But I must get up at sort of 7 or the kids. And so you don't worry, well, as long as I'm getting the bare minimum, sleep science says 7 to 9 hours. So if I'm hitting 7, I was hitting 8, I feel like death on 7. But, that's what. So we start sacrificing things and making excuses, justifying it on the basis that I'll only need to do it for a short time and then everything will get better. A slower day will come. But of course, it never does. Checking your emails when you shouldn't, late at night, where you can't switch off. And I see this particularly with NHS. I do some work on imposter syndrome, and particularly in NHS, where obviously you make a mistake. You misread the label on the bottle. You could kill someone. If I make a mistake in my talk, I just won't get booked again. The stakes for me are low. But therefore, if you work in an environment where the stakes are high, you may have a tendency to overthink things and dwell on things so you can't switch off. So, I mean, we could be here a long time talking about the signs, but we do need to talk about the signs. And I do think we need a better definition for the word burnout.
Yeah, no, that's really useful, actually. And do you have, what would you come up with as a term?
Or is that putting you on the spot? Yeah.
Maybe that's something to think about.
Yeah, I think, they do mention, they go beyond their definition with 3 key symptoms, which I think is more helpful. But I think just a small tweak, something like chronic stress that has built up due to many triggers, home-based and work-based, that would be better, I think. I know it can't be too long, otherwise no one will remember it.
Yeah. So given that, what do you reckon are the biggest internal barriers for men when it comes to reaching out or setting boundaries at work that will prevent them from getting to that stage?
Well, I think Matt mentioned some of these in terms of, you mentioned the words, Matt. I jotted them down, but just because I like to make notes when other people are talking. This sense of, I do think there is a stereotype, has been a stereotype. I'm 50, certainly from my generation, where I felt definitely it was my role to provide and protect. So what that then means, because I'm a modern man now, but the reality is, if I'm working hard, I'm guilty that I'm not being a better father. But then if I'm with the kids, let's say another of these days has popped up at school, bring a parent to school day. We get loads of these. And my kid would come home and they're like, right, it's this afternoon, you're going to build an Edwardian house with me in the afternoon at school. And I'm thinking, excuse the language, bloody hell, like, when am I going to? So, like, no, this is great, son. And I go with him, but I'm so twitched. What about those emails that I'm not answering? What about, like, can I really afford to take? So I get stuck in this kind of place because I want to provide, I want to protect. I think most of us are conscientious. We want to do a good job. We want to feel that we're needed, that we are dependable. And so it's just hard, therefore, flagging up where we're struggling. It's hard to say no. And so when we take more stuff on, then we're not going to deliver as well. And for me, managing boundaries is about learning to say yes with intention, learning to say no with intention, and learning to say it depends with intention, and just doing that a bit more mindfully. But there's no easy answers, and it is a juggling act, definitely.
Yeah, I mean, for me, those two keywords there are really important. It is with intention and mindfully, because actually recognizing both of those elements is really important. That by being mindful, you can then act with intention.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think I do work on boundaries in some of my talks. And for me, I'm really passionate that there's so much out there. Oh, you've got to learn to say no. And that's right. But managing your boundaries is a lot more than that. We need to think more deeply about our boundaries. Rather than just saying, what am I saying no to? What am I going to accept? What am I not going to tolerate? What am I going to flex on? Those are the kind of questions you need to ask yourself in order to start making progress on your boundaries.
Yeah, no, that's really important. Really important. That's fantastic. Okay, thanks very much for that. Michael, can we come over to you?
Yes, of course.
I've noticed that you talk quite openly about your own mental health on LinkedIn, and I know that this is something that we discussed in our conversation a few weeks back as a result of my own experience. But I'm wondering that from your work in recruitment, have you noticed any trends around how men talk or don't talk about mental health and workplace culture when they're changing jobs or starting new roles?
Yeah, definitely a couple of trends, and one of the reasons I do talk about it on LinkedIn is one of the trends is that what I found is that when one person starts to talk about it, or one man starts to talk about it in a room of other men, for a long time that person was alone, and I can say that from experience. That person was by themselves and talking about it. But now what I've noticed is it encourages more men to speak up about it, and they'll openly start and have conversations about it, which is interesting because, like I said before, for a long time, you would feel like the odd one out when you were having sort of a bad day, for lack of a better word. But now I have noticed that people will engage in the conversation, and people will say, "Oh, I feel like that as well," or "I feel like this," or people will start to openly have a conversation. I think the other thing I've noticed is that men in particular are more aware of the language that they use. So again, going back to a fair few years ago when I first started feeling a little bit of stress, it was always sort of called stress. But now men are using words such as "I'm feeling anxious" or "I'm struggling mentally today." And again, those are developments, or positive developments, in my opinion, that I've noticed quite a lot over the last couple of years in particular. So it seems to be positive and going in the right direction. There's a lot more we can do. That certainly hasn't solved all the issues, but I have noticed those couple of positive trends.
That's really good to hear, and it's interesting that again, kind of you're touching on a lot of things that Matt's said there as well in his talk about it's actually the first person who steps into that threshold and is prepared to share their experience. Then it opens a doorway for others to do the same.
Yeah.
Sorry, mate.
No, absolutely, and it is about showing that we're human at the end of the day, and I think when one person shows a little bit of sign of that, then other people feel like they're more comfortable to do so.
Yeah, and being prepared to show that humanity rather than the being invincible.
Yeah.
I'm just wondering how do company cultures show up during the hiring process, and how might they either kind of help or hinder a man's sense of feeling psychologically safe within a work environment?
It's an interesting question, and actually, interestingly enough, again, back 10 years ago, it probably wasn't even the conversation we had during a sort of a pre-work conversation with men. They were more interested in the job and the salary, whereas now those questions come up probably before the salary and before the actual job. You know, what's the culture like? What support's available? So what I can see is that I think it starts with job adverts in particular. So if we look at job adverts, the terminology and the language used in job adverts is important. Again, you look at very aggressive adverts like target-driven, KPI-driven. Can we look at that, and can we make them a bit more human, so people feel that it's about them and not just about productivity and about the business? And during interview processes, the openness and willingness to have a conversation about mental health or about well-being in general, not just, again, give me an example when you did this or achieved this. It's what do you do when you're not feeling amazing? You know, what environments are better for you to perform in? You know, those are the questions that people care about. So I think, and again, like I said before, that more and more so, they are key areas that candidates are focusing on. So employers are going to have to think about it.
Yeah, no, that's really interesting. I mean, it's made me think about a conversation I had last week with a guy in his late 20s, and he's just left a company because of the culture, and that it was very target driven, and you need to be in work early and finishing work late, and because we pay you well, and if you don't do that, then you're not delivering, regardless of the actual results that you are delivering when you're in work. And so I'm just wondering, do you find that actually there is a shift in that people are more prepared to leave jobs because of company culture than perhaps has been in the past?
Yeah, huge shift, massive. I think post-pandemic in particular, and again, because we're focused on men, we're focused on men, but I've seen a massive increase of men being more self-aware themselves, and they've realised what environments work for them. That doesn't mean that they always go for that. You know, as we said earlier, we kind of feel guilty for doing so, and we feel like it's selfish, so we don't do it all the time. But I am noticing more and more people say, I'm getting paid really well where I am, but money isn't everything. And that's true to a certain extent. Obviously, you have to focus, you have to have the financials, right? But that is again a key consideration when people are changing jobs.
Yeah, no, really important. And would you give any specific practical advice for managers who are hiring candidates who want to be more aware of mental health, specifically when bringing male employees on board?
Yeah, the first one would be just normalise the conversation. We're doing this, and it's kind of the conversations around men's mental health, and when we do live, it kind of stands out. It shouldn't. It should just, you know, we should normalise these conversations. Men go to the gym to look after their bodies. We should normalise these conversations to look after our mental well-being. And then the other thing, what I would say is, employers need to learn how to ask questions about mental health without putting that mental health label on it. So it doesn't have to be what makes you struggle mentally, the question. It can be, what is the best environment for you to work in? You get the answer you get answers both questions, but the way you ask it doesn't make a person feel like they're talking about their mental health, and doesn't make them feel also vulnerable. So I think that they're the two bits of advice I would give employers, is to have a think about how they're asking questions, and normalise and have those conversations.
Yeah, that's really powerful. Thanks, Michael. Guys, can we open it up to a more general discussion at this point? And I'm just wondering what you guys feel the biggest shift is that needs to happen at the level of leadership or policy or culture on the ground. Who wants to start us off?
Well, okay. Well, I'll say something briefly. I think in terms of men, I think this is changing, but I think this sense of in speaking up for areas where men are struggling, particularly if they've been bullied by a female, that actually we've still got work to do for creating equality for women and girls. That work must continue. But we can also advocate for men's well-being at the same time, and progress in one is not a kick in the teeth for the other. Every pound we invest in men's well-being is actually a pound for women, the women that love those men, and vice versa. So I think just being able to talk about areas where men are struggling, even the more taboo areas, as someone that struggled in a formerly abusive marriage, my perpetrator was female. Just being able to talk openly. I mean, I do talk openly, but I think just understanding that this is not a step back for women when you are pursuing stuff for men. We do it all at the same time. For me, that's an important change. I think it's happening. It needs to happen at Parliament level. It needs to happen within the media. It needs to happen within our businesses.
Yeah, right. Yeah. Michael also touched on a few points there about being human, treating people like they're human, and the changing attitude towards culture, and whether that, well, it obviously did have a huge change through COVID, but I find it really interesting. Something I talk a fair bit about is intergenerational differences within the workplace, and that's not just men to men. That's every single person in the workplace, and there's a real shift in attitudes towards what people want out of work, whether that's their path in life, or the environment, like the physical environment they want, or working remotely, or their entire experience in that workplace. It's completely shifted. Money obviously is important. We need to pay our bills. We need to try and live our lives as best we can, but the data is now coming in that people would prefer to take a pay cut for something that gives them a better balance in life, something that isn't as mentally taxing. Stress isn't always a bad thing. There are good stresses, so stress isn't the enemy here, but it's these environments that are not giving you what you need as a human, and it's quite a complex situation, because there isn't one stereotype you can put men into, or women into, or anyone into. Everyone's going to have their own ambitions, their own path, their own thoughts and ideas and goals, and it's about understanding that. And the recruitment stage is super important to one, finding the right person, but also then getting the information that you can then use later. Knowledge is power. You can understand that person from that very initial stage, but whether they fit your culture, that's a whole nother conversation. Whether someone fits the culture is a very interesting topic. If they need to fit within what you think is the culture, then anyway, that knowledge is power, and you can understand that person and then create environments that will help them with their life and their mental health, but also get the most out of them. People who are mentally healthy and happy and fulfilled, they perform better. And the companies that do this right, they're performing better. The data's out there. I'm not going to bore with stats today. I think it's better to just have a conversation. But it's clear that mentally healthy people, no matter who they are, fulfilled people, no matter who they are, perform better, and it's super important.
You're right, it is super important, but I still, I mean, obviously I work with a lot of guys one-to-one from a whole range of different backgrounds and industries, but I still find that within, and it's not, I'm not even just being on the ground. Do you find that as well?
Would you be able to repeat that? Sorry, Stephen. I think you cut out there briefly, at least on my end.
Yeah, I think the connection's just gone bit haywire there. Yeah, I work with a lot of guys across different industries, and just find that often that whilst we know that is the case, and that is proven to be the case, that actually on the ground it's not being translated into a lot of workplaces. And there are a lot of senior managers and HR managers out there who are not actually taking that on board in a practical way.
Yeah, I'll open it up to someone else in a moment, but I remember maybe 3 or 4 months back, a friend handing me a magazine from CIPD, and it was from, I believe, 2015. I got into this conversation, after my turbulent time in 2019, and I've been talking quite openly about it for 5 years. And I read this article, and it was talking about similar things that we're talking about now, and it made me incredibly angry that we're still having this conversation. And there are some businesses doing it extremely well, and there are some people taking it on.
Yeah.
But it's not as widespread as what it should and could be. And maybe that comes down to a skill of these individuals in charge. Maybe it comes down to money. Something I've been thinking about this past week is someone who works at a high street shoe shop said that they haven't hit their quota yet to need a security guard on the front door. It sounds like, by the looks of it, unless it breaches a cap where they can pay for someone's full-time salary and maybe more, then there's no use putting a security guard on, because they're not actually losing money. So maybe that is also an issue. Businesses can't quantify how much money they're losing, so therefore they can't justify spending money on it. And it is definitely an issue in this conversation. How do you put that on a balance sheet past, say, absent rates and turnover? And then how do you justify that and say it was because of that, rather than, they just moved on to another role? Because, when you do leave roles, it's a lot easier to say I left because they offered me more money, rather than say I left because this is a toxic workplace. Let's have a conversation about it. But yeah.
Michael, what are your thoughts?
Interesting. I was waiting for that because devil's advocate to a certain extent here. So I'm on both sides. We employ people as a recruitment business. We're employers, but equally, obviously, we have work with them. We get people jobs as well. So I work with employers. So I think, first of all, from an employer standpoint, the statistics are there, and we absolutely know that supporting men and people in general with their mental health leads to more productivity. There's a certain part, and this is because I'm in it every day. I can say it's very difficult to not necessarily quantify, but it's difficult to put the systems and processes in place to make sure that we are consistently delivering for everybody the same level of mental well-being support. So I think it's difficult. There are no systems and processes. We're in a generation now where people are openly talking about it a lot more, and I think employers are still getting used to that. They're still thinking, right, this is an issue. Of course, it's an issue, but it's an issue that isn't going to go away. So we are looking at how we can support and do better. But at the moment, it falls quite a bit short. So I suppose the message there is employers are trying, but it is very, very difficult. So there's a little bit of empathy there for them. And then from the other side, though, from the people angle, I think employer now more than ever, people are your biggest asset. So we went through Industrial Revolution, it was all about machines. Now it's all about people, and I think employers need to realize that it was easy for years to say, I'll just replace him, I'll just get somebody else in. You can't do that as much now. Those skill sets are very hard to find. So you need to look after the people who work for you, whatever their skill and whatever the job. So yeah, employers need to realise that whether you can quantify it or not, looking after your people is an absolute priority, potentially just as much as revenue and profit, because one doesn't work without the other, unfortunately. So yeah, I think that's my view on the on both sides.
Yeah, no, that's really important. And Matt touched on there about whether the extent to which managers have got the skill sets that's actually needed to be able to support people who are struggling. And I'm just wondering whether more emphasis on training managers and having skilled managers who can have those difficult conversations and know where to go with them is an area really for businesses to focus on in the future.
I would just say I think it is. I think obviously we've seen mental health first aid, and that's great. I did the 2-day course a while ago. I just wonder whether for people managers need to be convinced, I think, that they can make a difference, that I think the training that we deliver has got to be impactful, quite concise, quite lively. I think we need to make it fun. My dog's about to go crazy because someone's banged on the door, but they'll have to wait on the doorstep, please. Dear me. So I think trying to make mental health awareness type training, I think training is required, but we've got to make it fun. We've got to make it lighthearted. We've got to bring optimism into the message. I think sometimes it can feel a little bit dry, a little bit sort of virtuous, and I think we need to liven it up as mental health speakers and have a lot of fun with it. Otherwise, people just switch off, and it's just another management training thing they've got to go on, which they don't really want to be on.
May I jump in there? I'm going to say something that could be rather controversial. You mentioned mental health first aid, and I've done that very recently. I did a suicide intervention training, especially sort of focused on my walk in case I encounter someone on this walk I'm going on where I need to help them. These are absolutely fantastic trainings. This is not me trying to say they're not, but they're trainings that you wish you never need to use. They're trainings that are there for when someone is in that very dark place and they need the help to, find further help or to just, break that downward spiral that they're in. And it's becoming really popular in the workplace, as it should be. But is this a solution to creating workplaces that are more inclusive, more, actively trying to create these cultures that help people be their best and do their best? Like, I personally am not sure if they are. They're incredibly important, but they're incredibly important for a different reason. They're not one thing that businesses should do and then they've done their bit. In a perfect world, they do the mental health first aid training and they never need to actually use it. That would be, a great thing that happens. They should definitely still have it, but they should be doing a lot of work that is preventative as well. Mental health first aid is a reactive training. You do the first aid training. If we're talking about physical first aid here, you do the first aid training, but you will, you'll put guards in front of a saw so that people don't chop their finger off in the first place. It's those sorts of conversations that we need to start having. And then if we go to the training point of view, managers are super crucial for this. And here's the potential controversial bit. Is HR, put in place to do this? There are some amazing HR and people professionals out there, but a lot of it is, process and policy. And then, the job titles almost had like a branding name shift there. They're no longer in HR, they're in people, but their actual skills and training hasn't changed. they're still doing the same role. And then when we have these conversations around how do you create these inclusive cultures, and again, there are some amazing people doing this, but I would say the majority aren't. I don't want to use the word qualified because it feels quite harsh to, lead this conversation into, how do we create these cultures where people can do their best and be their best. It's a completely different skill set, and it's something that is very preventative and super important, and it should be just as important as suicide prevention training and mental health first aid. And every business should have at least a handful of people who have been trained in that, but then they should be doing more on top of that, because it's good for people and it's also good for business. So makes sense.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. Michael, have you got any thoughts?
Yeah. I think I'll just pick up on the prevention piece. I think that's absolutely key. One, because it's easier, I think, to prevent as opposed to coming afterwards when the damage is done. So why not prevent it? And the other thing I would say, are managers trained, or have they got the right tools? No is probably the honest answer, and I'm generalizing there, but if we think historically, how do we, and this isn't true for every manager, but if we think, how do we choose a manager? It's based on performance. And a lot of the time it's what we discussed earlier on in the job adverts, higher KPIs, higher targets. It's usually the highest achievers that become managers. Does that make them good managers of people? Or they're just good at their job? I'll let the silence answer that, but that's kind of the question I would pose when we're looking at who do we appoint as managers, is what's important, what's an important skill to have? Is it just achievement, or is there more to it?
Yeah, really important point. Okay, guys, I've got a closing question for each of you. If you could give one actionable step that businesses could take this week to better support men's mental health, what would it be? Who wants to kick us off?
I'll go first, and so I don't have to steal one of your ideas, Gent. I'm going to cheap cop out a little bit here and use something I used earlier. Just normalize the conversation, and that's the best piece of advice I can give to anybody. Is when somebody comes and has a chat with you and says, "I'm struggling mentally," that doesn't mean they're not interested. It doesn't mean they're not engaged. It doesn't mean they want to leave. It doesn't mean all of those things. It doesn't mean they hate the business. It means they need a little bit of support, or a lot of support. So make safe spaces where people, employees in particular, and men in particular, can have those conversations.
That's really important. Yeah, thanks, Michael.
Do you want to go next, Matt? I've got one
Sure.
thought, but yeah, go next.
You go for it.
You sure? If it's your thought, I'm really, really sorry, but yeah. I mean, for me, the one thing, like, we know in psychological safety, it's important that people feel safe to open up, but people don't just instinctively feel safe just because they've got a nice boss who's quite approachable. You have to, as leaders and managers, give people permission to feel safe. So the one thing you could do if you're a manager or a leader this week is to talk to your team, either individually or all together, and say, even if I'm in a foul mood and it's clear I've had a bad day and you've got something inconvenient to tell me, or something you're struggling with, something that's going to add to my list of burdens, please come and tell me, because I want to know about it. And you have to give them that permission. Start doing it this week and then reinforce it week in, week out, so people absolutely know they are safe to raise concerns and be themselves.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's it really. And to be able to consistently show that, so that people they might hold back this week, but next week they might feel that little bit, it's a little bit easier, or the week after they might find, yeah, actually I can now do it because the evidence is there. Yeah, that's cool. Thank you.
My tip is always, whenever I'm asked this question, what one small thing would you do? I always feel a bit silly saying it because it's so simple, and it's just talk to your damn people. Just get out there, have a conversation. You know, I mentioned earlier, you know, knowledge is power, and there is that side of things, but you know, there is also, you know, opening up, having these conversations yourself opens up further conversations, and it opens up people's ability to, you know, use, you know, the resources you give them when it comes to, you know, mental health and well-being. And I feel that more leaders should, you know, not all the time, because, you know, you do need that leadership structure, but sometimes you need to talk to someone like a human being and not just as a leader, because ultimately, you know, we are all professionals, we are all employees, but we are all human at the end of the day. And, you know, sometimes we just need to talk to each other and, you know, let those walls down. And and one last final thing is small steps are so important. I'm not going to go into a big old rant into atomic habits, but, you know, these things stack, and one small step, you know, whether that's talking to your people or opening up the conversations, can definitely lead to further improvements. And the small things are the first step. You just got to take it.
But both those are really powerful, and actually in reality not so small, because of the impact that they have. And I remember one of the best pieces of advice I ever had from a great headmaster was every day go and talk to every single one of your boys. Just show them that you are there, so that when they need it, they can come to you. And then decades later, I had a boy come back to me on your next point there, and just said, the reason that you made a difference to me was because you spoke to me as if it was another human being, that it wasn't about superiority and teacher or a master to pupil. It was, you were one human being talking to me as another human being. And that works in schools, it works in workplaces. Really, really valuable. So appreciate that. Thank you very much, gents. I really appreciate this conversation. It's been fantastic. So for what I'll say is, for more great content, don't forget to follow Andrew, Matt, and Michael, all on LinkedIn, and to subscribe to my newsletter, the Men's Mental Health Perspective. Watch out for future events. I've got one coming up in advance at Mental Health Awareness Week with Andy Kane and Zach Tullett, where we're going to be exploring the importance of community. And if you're passionate about men's mental health and want to join a future LinkedIn Live, or just connect and have a conversation, send me a DM. And in the meantime, everybody, take care. Look after yourself.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.